Many modern readers approach ancient scripture as if they are trying to extract a single, isolated piece of data. They take a pair of tweezers, pull a single sentence out of its chapter, look up the translated words in a modern dictionary, and assume they have grasped exactly what the original author intended. This is the Western literalist shortcut. On the surface, it feels incredibly pious. Taking a text purely at face value seems like the most respectful way to read it. In reality, it actively skips the heavy lifting required to actually understand the text. The most obvious symptom of this shortcut is a habit called rule hunting. You scan the page quickly, ignoring the narrative arcs, searching only for immediate commands to perform or behaviors to avoid in your daily life. The mechanical failure of rule hunting happens right here. When you slice away the surrounding paragraphs, you completely dismantle the continuous historical narrative. The text devolves into a disjointed list of standalone fortune cookie statements. In that vacuum, massive amounts of critical data vanish. You lose the specific linguistic nuances of biblical Hebrew. You lose the cultural realities of the ancient Near East. Most importantly, you lose the immediate historical crises those authors were writing to address. Extracting modern rules from an ancient vacuum does not get you closer to the divine message. It entirely blinds you to the actual story of what God is actively doing in the text. The required intervention for this reading shortcut is a foundational Jewish methodology known as peshat. Western readers often mistranslate peshat as the plain sense and mistakenly assume it means a shallow, surface-level reading. The Jewish tradition demands exactly the opposite. Peshat refers to the most direct, contextually grounded sense of the text. It requires immense intellectual effort. Before a single verse can be properly understood, peshat demands analysis across multiple layers. You have to interrogate the grammar, the specific historical era, the literary genre, and how the passage functions structurally within its broader story. This rigor is anchored by a classical rabbinic maxim: a verse never departs from its plain meaning. That maxim creates a strict functional boundary. Later readers are free to draw deep spiritual significance, complex allegories, or modern devotional applications from a passage, but those secondary layers are never allowed to override or erase what the text actually meant to its very first audience in their original language. Peshat rewires your reading posture. It establishes a sequence. You are forced to ask, what did this mean to them, and do the work to find the answer, long before you are allowed to ask, what does this tell me to do? Let's test these two approaches against the famous eye for an eye law in Exodus 21. Applying the literalist shortcut leaves you with a disturbing rule, a literal command for violent retribution and physical mutilation. Case closed. But applying peshat means cross-referencing that phrase with the legal practices and rabbinic analyses of surrounding ancient cultures. This context reveals something entirely different. The phrase described a regulated system for monetary compensation, establishing proportional restitution. The shortcut fabricated a divine license for vengeance. The context reveals a massive societal leap toward regulated limits and advancing justice. We can see a similar breakdown in large historical narratives, like the account of King David and Bathsheba in 2 Samuel. A rule hunter scans that sprawling narrative, locates the moral failure, and decides the text exists simply to stamp out the command, "Don't commit adultery." The moral rule is obviously correct. That stopping there flattens the architecture of the Book of Samuel, ignoring the intricate character development and the political markers woven throughout the chapters. Peshat reading tracks the actual themes the author was developing: the corruption of royal power, the absolute necessity of prophetic accountability, and the breakdown of covenant faithfulness. Extracting a single behavioral rule for today misses the entire historical timeline of what God is actively revealing about Israel's monarchy. These examples highlight two highly incompatible operating systems. Rule hunting frantically scans the page to extract principles for immediate obedience. Story hearing listens patiently for narrative trajectory, conflict, and resolution. Look at the final paradox of the Ten Commandments. In Exodus chapter 20, the Sabbath command is justified because God rested during creation. But later, in Deuteronomy chapter 5, the exact same Sabbath command is justified because God liberated the Israelites from slavery. The rule hunter encounters a massive anxiety spike here. Two conflicting reasons for the same rule. Which one is the real motivation? Which one do you actually obey? The peshat resolution is that both are completely valid. because they address the exact same people at two entirely different moments in their ongoing historical relationship with God. The meaning evolves because the story moved forward. To practice this yourself, start reading in whole paragraphs instead of single verses. Compare different translations to catch underlying Hebrew nuances. And before you ask how to apply a text to your life today, ask what specific historical problem it was attempting to solve back then. When you abandon the literalist shortcut, you stop treating Scripture as a disjointed manual of rigid commands. You allow it to be what it actually is, a rich, coherent narrative of relationship that you can finally trust.